Okay. I just need to let my colleague know that we're good to go and she'll let us go live. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into this panel event. It's called Your Voice, Your Vote, Your Power. Tonight, we'll be discussing how this is the 100th anniversary of women earning the right to vote and how that translates to the 2020 election and just how crucial it is to exercise your right to vote. My name is Aryn Fields. I'll be the moderator this evening. I am here representing the Women's Opportunity Center, the host organization for tonight's panel. The Women's Opportunity Center is a nonprofit organization located in both Syracuse and Ithaca. They offer free programs and services to help women with job readiness training and providing on-the-job skill training as well. So I want to thank, first and foremost, our tonight's panelists for joining us this evening. I'm just going to run through a couple of quick introductions before we get started. First is State Senator Rachel May. She was elected to serve the 53rd District in the New York State Senate in 2018. As a Syracuse resident, she had a successful career as an educator before being elected to the State Senate. Thank you for joining us, Senator May. And then next is Syracuse Deputy Mayor Sharon Owens. In her position as Deputy Mayor, she oversees city programs and services that address quality of life in our community, including neighborhood and business development. And then we have Sue Boland. She is a local historian for the Matilda, Jazlyn, Gage Center for Social Justice Dialogue here in Fayetteville. She has a master's degree in public history and has been studying the women's suffrage movement for over 20 years. And then finally, we have Sally Grubb. She is the co-president of the Tompkins County League of Women Voters. And the League is a nonpartisan organization that works to register voters, provide voters with election information through voter guides, candidate forums, and debates. So thank you all again for joining us this evening and taking your time out to do this. We all appreciate it. And so let's just cut to the chase. Let's get right to it. We hear a popular sentiment every time a new election cycle comes around, which is each vote is a voice heard. So I just want to dive into that a bit more. Why does voting matter? What does that mean? And anyone can feel free to answer.
Well, I'll leap in. So it isn't just that elections are won or lost sometimes by one or two votes. I mean, it does actually matter to the outcome of elections if you vote, but it also, as someone who has run a campaign in the past, one of the things we pay attention to is who votes and who doesn't. And you're much more likely to reach out to the people who have voted in the past because they're likely to vote in the future. And so those are the people we talk to. Those are the people whose voices get heard in the course of a campaign. And we think, you know, what they care about, we're more likely to hear that than from people who vote. It's just, you know, you have to allocate your time and you do it to the people you think are going to vote. And so if everybody voted, they would all have, their voices would be heard more.
I would say
Sally?
I was going to follow in on that and say that we talk about voting not just in the general election, but all the way, right the way down to village elections, local town elections, and also school board elections. And your school board election, when you're a young parent, your voice really does count. And with Rachel saying that she pays attention to the people who vote, yes, school boards pay attention to the people who vote. And you can be, you really can make a difference in your local community if you go out and vote and tell the people who are representing you what you want them to do. Do you want them to spend money filling potholes? Or do you want them to support the local sports arena? hundreds of things that you can let your voice be heard about.
Deputy Mayor, did you want to chime in?
Yes, similar to what was just said, government policy, legislation, program implementation, all is created, enacted, and enforced by elected officials. These things from exactly where your potholes are going to be filled, or if we're going to fill potholes, to the size of your fire department, are enacted, legislated, enacted by people that you elect. And so who you elect has absolutely great and very real impact on your everyday lives.
And so kind of piggybacking off of everything you just said, a really popular thing that you hear people say when you make this argument of why voting matters is, but I just have one vote. My vote doesn't matter, especially if you have, hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people in an area. People don't think their one vote matters. So why is that not true?
Well, that's sort of what I answered before. Basically, it can change an election, but it also the fact that you vote is something that people pay attention to.
But I think one vote does matter. And if you think of old-fashioned scales where you put a weight on one side and a weight on the other, when they're absolutely level and you put in that one paper, very light paper ballot, it will alter what's going on. And one vote can make a difference. Think about back when you were at school and you were voting for your class president. One vote could make an enormous difference because you're only talking about what, 25, 30 people? So it makes a difference right from the beginning all the way up to the top.
And so speaking of voices being heard, obviously as elected officials, Senator May and Deputy Mayor Owens, you decided to, really make your voices be heard and run for public office. What was that moment that really made you decide that you wanted to dedicate your life to public service? You can start.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I had been involved in working in other people's campaigns and lobbying, calling my elected officials all my life. But I had a moment must have been 2017, where I was with a group of people. We were talking to our state senator, and somebody said, we feel like you're not really doing your job. Maybe somebody should run against you. And his response was to say, you can't do that. You can't run against me. And I immediately thought, as soon as your elected official starts thinking that way, that's the moment when somebody's got to run against that person, because your democracy isn't working if your elected officials really don't think that they can be challenged. I will say I did not think it was going to be me. I just thought, I'm going to go find somebody to run. And then people kept nudging me in the direction of running, and it ended up being me who ran. But it was really that sense. My democracy wasn't working and someone needed to step forward.
So I am not an elected official. I am an appointed official by the mayor. So that in and of itself, I think, is an important point, that you begin to understand just the dynamics of who's elected, who's appointed, by getting involved in the process and understanding who is asking for your vote, and who those individuals in turn will appoint, like me, to take on some very significant roles in government.
So I ran for school board back in, long time ago, 96, I think. And I wanted to join the school board because I was concerned about the way the school district was handling the AIDS crisis and sexuality education in the schools. And so I decided the best thing to do was to join the school board. So I ran an election campaign, and yes, I was elected. So that brought very much brought my voice onto the school board and the people who thought like me. So.
And Sue, I can ask a similar question. You've dedicated your life to studying voting and the importance of, the women's vote. And so what really made you want to, dedicate your life to that? Oh, Sue, I think you're on mute.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Not you.
I lived half a mile from the Matilda Jazlyn Gage house in Fayetteville, and I knew it was a stop on the Underground Railroad. I wanted to find out more about the local history in my area. And when I found out about what she had done for women's suffrage and how she had gotten written out of history, I was really struck by the injustice of it. That such an important woman was not well known, even in her own, central New York area. So that's what got me started. And lately, what has been keeping me going is the realization that because of this anniversary today, so much has come out about the racism in the movement, and obviously we're confronting racism in our society, which has been unchecked for centuries. And I think that's what's keeping me going is the realization that political involvement, which takes many different forms, not just voting, but the vote is very important to as a way of fixing the problems in society. And so, that's why I'm really, sticking to it right now.
And so I guess while we're talking, today is Women's Equality Day, and this year, 2020, is the 100th anniversary of women earning the right to vote and the 19th Amendment being passed. So Sue, could you walk us through some highlights of the suffragette movement and how it relates to Central New York?
Sure. I just, there's a few key points of things that are special about Central New York. The first is that the Native women, the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois people who lived in New York State and still do, the women had a voice in their government for centuries before white people even landed on the continent. In fact, Native women had a wide range of rights and respect and responsibilities that non-Native women did not have in the 19th century. And so a great book to explore this is Sisters in Spirit by Sally Roche Wagner, the executive director of the Gage Center. She's really the only historian that has really pursued this and written about this, and how the Haudenosaunee women inspired the suffragists of the 19th century. A lot of people know that the first Women's Rights Convention was held in Seneca Falls in 1848. It was a very small local meeting. And then in 1850 and 51, the first national women's rights conventions were held in Worcester, Massachusetts. But the third national, that was held in Syracuse in 1852. And this was a very big deal. It drew thousands of people to the old City Hall, which was in the same location as the current City Hall. And it was the first women's rights convention for both Matilda Jazlyn Gage and Susan B. Anthony. And it was the first convention to have a long argument about religion, namely Christianity, because that was the national religion at the time. And Christianity in the 19th century taught that women had been created by God to be subordinate and inferior to men. And of course, many suffragists interpreted the Bible differently and argued with these ministers. And so I think that was a real big influence on Matilda Jazlyn Gage, who later on in life really made that her her important contribution to the suffragist movement is looking at the oppression of women through religion and government merged together, and fighting in her own time for a separation of church and state. That's her biggest contribution that is not well known very much. Matilda Jazlyn Gage herself was born in Cicero, and she spent over 40 years living in Fayetteville, so she was a native Central New Yorker. She was a top leader of both the national and the state associations, working right alongside with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And instead of going on and on about her, I'll just invite you to look her up on the website, the Gage Center website, which is simply matildajazlyngage.org. So that's pretty easy to do. Or, just look in your county library system. There's all kinds of books about her, including the one that I mentioned, Sisters in Spirit. And hopefully soon you'll be able to visit her home, which has been turned into a museum. And so I'm going to, cut Gage short, even though she's very important, because I want to mention two other women who I also love and were important in their own ways. One who's not very well known is a woman named Ammonia Highgate, who was a Black woman born in Freedom in Syracuse. And she graduated from high school, the only African-American in her class, and became a teacher, which was one of the few professions open to women at the time. And there are a few records available of her life, but we know that she gave an address at the National Convention of Colored Men in 1864 in Syracuse, which was a very important group of African-American men that were fighting for the vote, and resulted in, and other rights too as well, but it resulted in the 14th and 15th Amendments, giving them the vote. And so she attended and gave, which was very unusual to have women attending a group like that, and asked them to consider Black women, that they needed voting rights as well. And she actually, after the Civil War, she actually went to the South and taught, the people that had been freed. And so she's just, one of those terrific heroines that people don't know about very much. The other woman that I want to just mention briefly is Harriet May Mills, who was a prominent suffrage leader many years later, towards the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century. Like Gage, she was a writer, a speaker, an organizer for the state and national women's suffrage associations. And her home, which is also still standing in Syracuse, was also a station on the Underground Railroad. So she had very liberal parents. And for a time in the early 1900s, it was actually the headquarters for the state and national movements, just as Gage's was. And Harriet May Mills held offices at both the top state and national levels. So these homes were not just where they lived, they weren't just a domestic place, but they were centers of activity and where those women wrote and worked. And that's how the Gage home is described when you visit as a museum. That's how it's, people ask about the family and the docents answer the questions, but we really prefer to talk about her work. Harriet May Mills was also in 1920, after women got the vote, she was the first woman to seek a statewide office as a candidate of a major political party. She ran for Attorney General of New York, did not win, but, sort of broke that barrier. And, but you see, when you study the suffrage movement over many years, you see all these different women, each breaking, a barrier in their time, and it kind of like all adds up. It's like going up a set of stairs, each one enables the people after them to go a little bit higher, up to the glass ceiling, so to speak. And so, I love them. I just think they're such courageous women. They didn't care what other people thought. They just spoke their mind and did what they thought was right. They got into good trouble. And so, they advanced the cause of democracy for us, and we have to keep doing that, especially when it comes to voter suppression. I think they would be shocked to hear about what kind of voter suppression types of things are still going on. So, every generation has their cause, and that's our cause right now.
Thank you so much, Sue. That's so interesting to hear you talk about. And I just thought it was really important for us to highlight not only how hard these women fought, but how many of them were and how long it took to earn the right to vote, from when the suffragette movement started.
Oh yeah, 72 years.
Yeah, quite a long time. And so that's why I wanted you to talk about it, because I have a couple of statistics I wanted to review with you all that I think is rather frightening. And so highlighting how hard it was to earn the right to vote. And then now, according to the US Census, in every presidential election over the past 12 years, approximately 60% of the population has voted. So 40% of the US population isn't voting in national elections. And then to make it local, here in Onondaga County, we had a local election. It was just local people on the ballot in November of 2019, so a little less than a year ago, and only 33% of registered voters voted in that election. So that number is just the people who are registered to vote voted, and that's 33%. So it's much likely that a lot less people than 33% of the population actually voted. So this question is open to all of you. What does it mean for a community when a small portion of the population is deciding an election for everyone? Oh.
It speaks to the inequity overall of the results that we're going to get. It's not a result that is going to be representative of, one of the best things about this community in particular is its diversity on all levels. And I think what we really need to begin to ask ourselves is why so many people don't decide to exercise a vote. And speaking, as a Black woman and knowing what African Americans fought for in the civil rights movement for the right to vote, what causes the choice not to exercise the vote, and to the point that was just recently made, the tactics that prevent people from voting around as it pertains to exercising their right to vote. I go to the polls because I sat around a couch and a kitchen table with my mother, who went on marches to Washington and voter rights marches, particularly around the issues of the right to vote for African Americans in this country. And I'm a generation away from that struggle. And so when I hear, not watching TV and the films from that time, but hear from my mother about dogs literally being sicked on her and being scared to drive at night to help people vote. That's what drives me to the polls. That reality for me is not 100 years ago. It's within a lifetime of a person I see every week, when I visit her every week. And so it's very real for me that it is my obligation to people who died for my right to cast a vote.
Let me also add that when the people who don't vote are generally people who don't feel like their voice matters. And the people who are confident that their voice matters, and that's typically people with wealth or power already, they are always going to vote because they understand how important it is to keep that power that they have. So when we see lots of people not voting, what the result is almost inevitably going to be to perpetuate whatever the status quo is in terms of power relations that are out there. And the other piece of that I've learned, especially in, because we've done a lot of election law changes in New York, is one of the things that suppresses the vote the most isn't deliberate attempts to make it hard to get to the polls or that kind of thing. It's just if you can confuse people enough, they will not bother to vote because they don't think they understand what's going on. And that is a tactic that we don't often recognize as a tactic, but it is used all the time. And one of the things we did last year when we were revamping New York's election laws was try to make the ballot more comprehensible, less confusing, and full of duplicate information and that sort of thing, and only on one page, and all kinds of things just to make it easier for people to understand what they were doing when they went to vote, so they didn't feel like they were somehow helpless in the process. So it's really important to have the information, but also to make it clear to people why it's important and how to do it.
Mhm.
It's also really important that people understand what the people they have a choice to vote for, what they stand for. If one tends to vote for the name you know because you're comfortable with what you know, and so if always out there's the name of, I don't know, Bill Smith, you will eventually think, oh, I must vote for Bill Smith. And that's not the right way to vote. What the League of Women Voters do is try to get out as much information about everything to do with the election as it's possible. And we now have this vote411.org, where all the different leagues throughout the country feed in information about their local elections, local candidates, local races. And then this goes up to the states, where the state does the same thing, and then it goes up to national. And anybody anywhere in the country can go to vote411, put in their address, and get the information about the races that are being run in their community. And also, if the local league has it supports vote411 and has the person power to do the work, there will be information from each candidate. We reach out to each candidate in our local races and ask them a number of questions. And the questions are the same questions that go out to all candidates. And the candidates answer those questions, and then they're posted on vote411. And so you can find out the difference between Rachel in her race and the people who are running against her. And it means that you can make a much more balanced decision. You can vote on the issues as about necessarily voting for the party. You can vote for the person, what they believe in. If you're in favor of the environment, you can vote for the person who has the closest representation of your views on the environment. And so you can make an informed choice. And then you know that at the very least, your voice has been heard by somebody. And the more people who do that, the more balanced the result will be. We're a democracy, so every voice counts, and the majority wins. And if you're not in the majority, tough. But what's even worse is if you don't vote and don't help make that majority. What it must have been like for people like Shauna, not being able to vote, not because they didn't have the right to vote, but because so many obstacles were put in their way until 1965. I mean, it's terrible. When I first came to this country, I wasn't allowed to vote. I had to pay taxes, but I couldn't vote until I became a citizen. So I understand what it's like to not be able to vote.
Well, I thank you everyone for those great answers. I also think maybe another small part of it might be that not everyone realizes how much of their daily lives is affected by politics or public policy. Really, there's so much if you go, national, state, local, there's so much about, how we go about our day that's affected by politics. And as they say, knowledge is power. And so I think it's crucial that everyone is knowledgeable about, how much their lives are affected by politics, because then they have the power to change it through their vote and through political engagement. And so I want to start with Mayor Owens. If you could, local government will just affect your average person. I think that would be great for people to hear about.
Everything, the delineation of service to everyday folks like me when I put the key in my door and open the door, from the county to the city, county really engaging in a lot of programming that affects the lives of people, and being able to provide support, whether it be the health department during the COVID pandemic. The city is really infused in those public facing services, police, fire, how we're managing our roads, how we're paving our roads, et cetera. And the impact of how that's done, or what priorities are given, or the priority of whether that's done in an equitable way, that the influence of things going on in our city in particular shouldn't be because someone knows my number or Rachel's phone number. It should be because they have an equal opportunity to express their concerns or their desires or their wants. You asked a question earlier. I really believe that people, my one vote count, underestimate their influence. The individual has a lot of influence over many people in our own individual circles. We as humans gather around with individuals, like individuals, people with same interests or family members, and we have influence over that. That's why politicians ask us to put yard signs in our yard, because my 10 neighbors around me are going to see, who's Sharon voting for? I mean, you have influence, and that influence is critical, particularly as we get to the closer to the local level, because it is going to absolutely impact you. Case in point, we have been waiting for the once in a decade opportunity to count ourselves for the census. With a stroke of the pen, that is no longer the end of October, excuse me. Now it is the end of September. So how many people in 30 days are not, because 30 days have been shortened from that opportunity to be counted in the one in a decade opportunity we do in our election districts, our funding, allocations for municipalities are determined by those census numbers. Not-for-profit applications for funding are determined by those numbers. And with the stroke of a pen, now that has been shortened by 30 days. I don't even want to guess how many people are not going to be counted because 30 days have been taken from that. And it's because policymakers make those decisions. Policymakers are elected.
Yeah. And we can all, when we go home tonight, can make sure every single one of our neighbors and our neighbors' neighbors and our neighbors' neighbors' neighbors have taken the census survey. It is so important. It isn't true. 10 years is a long time, and it's a long time for a community, not necessarily my community, but any community, to go without the resources to which they're entitled. And that is what is going to happen if we're undercounted.
Yes, and to that point, you hear all the time, it's real simple. I did it. It's simple. I was on the computer and off in 10 minutes.
And it has a lot to do with how much of a voice you have, because the number of county legislators or city councilors is going to be determined by that. The number of state representatives, or that is federal representatives who represent New York is in Congress, is going to be determined by that. So your voice gets amplified or stifled,
Yeah.
depending on how many people complete the census.
Please go to census.gov.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good plug. And Senator May, I wanted to pose the same question to you about, what are some ways that state government really affects people on their day-to-day lives?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that, because people really don't know. Albany is far away, and state government, people kind of understand the federal government. They kind of, they see the mayor, they sort of understand what's going on at the city level, but at the state level, a lot happens that's really important. One of the reasons that I wanted to run was I was really frustrated with New York's election laws, and election laws are made at the state level. So New York was one of the very few states that didn't have early voting, and that made it, still, it makes it pretty hard to register to vote. And we have changed that down the road. We really made a lot of changes to New York's election laws, and some of them have already taken effect, like early voting. Some of them will take a little bit longer, but that felt really important to me. The state also does a lot of things like fair housing legislation and criminal justice legislation, and also the state budget is really important to a city like Syracuse. The school budget in Syracuse largely comes from the state. And so the state's ability to raise money and then how it allocates the money is very important to people's lives. The county depends pretty heavily on state funding as well.
Thank you for explaining.
Can I add just one more real example? At the city level, the mayor's office, we received so many calls about fireworks. They were driving everybody crazy. Yeah, people with PTSD, even our pets were being just adversely affected by just constant fireworks. Well, the legislation that governs who can buy and sell and what type of fireworks are legal in any municipality is not the local municipality, is a state law. And so when people were calling us, and Rachel probably felt the brunt of this, we were saying, call your state representatives, because it's all on the books that is actually making it easier for these things to be in our local cities and towns and villages.
And then another thing, your local zoning laws are controlled totally locally. In some places, you can't have a fence around your property. In other places, you can have a 10-foot high fence. It all depends on the local community. And you have to vote and participate to have the sort of fence you want.
And for the city of Syracuse, another plug, we are in the middle of our rezone, which is our zoning law that is probably 80 or 90 years old, and we're finally revamping it. It will go before the Common Council in a public process. And so, to the point someone else made, the election process and the political process is not just election day. It is being engaged all the time. Those city council meetings, those town and village meetings, they are critical, because those are where the decisions are made.
I actually have a great zoning story. I lived in St. Paul, Minnesota for a while, and I wanted to plant flowers between the sidewalk and the road. There was a stretch of ground there, and it was the only sunny spot on my property. And I was told I couldn't plant flowers there. We were only allowed to have grass there. And when I inquired as to why, it turned out that there was a lawnmower salesman on the city council, and he had insisted that people could only grow grass there. And that was an example where, the process wasn't working very well, and it was time for somebody to run against him.
Thank you all for explaining that. I mean, I don't think people fully, can comprehend that things as simple as, how tall your fence can be, or where or where not you can plant flowers, to, what the firework laws are, how much of it is really entrenched in government. And so if there's something you don't like, get involved, vote. You can change anything you want if you have enough political engagement. And so, open question for everyone, what's the best way that, other than voting, obviously, but like, what's the best way people can get involved?
Ooh.
Let me say, so running for office is great, but it's not for everybody, and it's a huge amount of work, and there are a lot of other ways. So before I did this, probably 15 years ago, I approached the mayor and at the time and said, I'm really interested in recycling and waste management. And he put me on the board of the Onondaga County Resource Recovery Agency. And I was one of, I forget, maybe 10 people there. And we were making big decisions. I was able to basically drive the decision to build a big state-of-the-art composting facility in Onondaga County. And so you can have a lot of voice by volunteering to do that kind of thing. There are a lot of boards out there that need people on them, and a lot of time that's required to make things happen. And a willing person is a great resource to a mayor or anybody who has to make those kinds of appointments.
Yeah.
And then I didn't want to do that anymore because I was trying to ride my bike everywhere and I couldn't get there. And so I switched and asked this mayor to put me on the Board of Zoning Appeals. And that was another place where those zoning decisions are really important. And so there are a lot of ways to get involved that are important, and good ways to network and to find out about how things work in your community.
And there's a new organization that's starting up here in Ithaca, and it's hopefully will be spreading. It's an organization called Rejoice the Vote. It's run by Jeff Furman, and his philosophy is that you start civic engagement in the schools, preferably as young as possible. You take your kids to vote, but you take your little kids to vote. In elementary and middle school, you start teaching them about election matters, what's going on in Albany. And you get them engaged through their own local activity within the schools. If a group of kids want something changed, they want a bench on the playground to sit on, you teach them how to lobby the school administration to allow them to have a bench. And then they start building from there until eventually you will find those little kids that first came to vote with you at the age of 5 are now running for public office.
And so in a COVID-19 world where, your traditional volunteering hubs where everyone goes and swarms to Canvas or swarms to Phone Bank, now that that's all kind of not happening right now, if people want to get involved in the 2020 election, for whoever, it doesn't matter, just if they want to get involved, what is a good way for people to, still be able to have their engagement?
Phone banking is still happening. Text banking is happening. One of my favorite things that happened in my campaign in 2018, and is happening all over now, is postcards to voters, where people write handwritten postcards. They get a list of names and they send them and it mattered a lot to the voters. I heard over and over they were so happy to have gotten a personalized postcard, even if it was written by someone in Montana. They were just happy to have had that feeling of personal outreach. So that's another thing that people are doing.
And one thing that they're short of everywhere because of older people being afraid of being in enclosed spaces is they're very short of poll workers. And so if you want to be closely involved and make it possible for the election to go well, volunteer to be a poll worker. I mean, you're paid for it, so it's not totally a volunteer activity. They will accept anybody from 17 and up this year to be a poll worker. And they're going to make it possible to have these early election sites fully manned. And on November the 3rd, for the polling booths to be fully manned to avoid, lines all the way around the block and back again. So that would be, Aryn, that would be something you're volunteering for the Women's Opportunity Center, Aryn. You could take time out to volunteer to be a poll worker.
Also registering people to vote, which is something, I heard a disturbing statistic, I think from the League of Women Voters, that was voter registration in 2020 is about half new voter registrations of what it was in 2016. So, and I'm sure that's a lot of it down to the pandemic, but people aren't registering at the rate that they were before.
It's very difficult to get out to people when you can't go face to face. Here in Ithaca, normally at this time of year, we're on the 3 campuses, registering students to vote, new staff, faculty who come from another place. We're giving them, letting them change their place of residence. We're not allowed on the campuses.
Right.
So all the festivals, the Ithaca Festival, the Apple Festival, all those festivals that we would normally be at, registering people to vote, we can't go there. We're now having to do it. We're trying hard now to do it remotely, doing it through the public libraries, doing it through food pantries, putting flyers into the food boxes and when you pick up books into your book bag, information to people on how they can register to vote in what's now a virtual world.
Thank you everyone for those tips. I'm sure that it will help everyone. Before we wrap up, I did say that we would have a Q&A if anyone put something in the comment section, and I did get a question. The question is, what tips or advice would you give someone navigating exercising their right to vote for the very first time?
I would say this year, either vote early in person, or if you want to vote by mail, just because the mail system is getting unpredictable, I would say do it as early as possible. Request your absentee ballot and send it in as early as possible.
It's not too early. You can do it now.
Right.
So I would recommend that you either go to your local league website or you go to vote411.org. It's easy to remember, vote411.org, and you can get all the information you need. You have to be able to read, but
I would also encourage first-time voters to become familiar with your Board of Elections. So
Yes.
a lot of information there, just a lot of information, so that you can understand the process, you can understand the availabilities, like doing poll working and getting trained to do that. Become familiar with your Board of Elections.
And you can call up your local if you don't have a computer, you don't have access to the internet, you can call up your local, I'm sure your local library, they're still answering phones, even if they're closed, will give you the phone number of your local Board of Elections, and then you can phone your local Board of Elections, and they are really helpful. Their mission is to get people to vote, and so they do their damnedest to get people to vote.
I would also just say, please, everyone, do your research. Know who your local in the city district councilor is. Know who the councilors at large is. Know who your county reps are. Know who your state representatives are. Just know who it is that represents you. Because you can be on one side of a street and there'll be one representative, and on the other side of the street, there is another.
It's true, yeah. I was teaching a class one time, and I asked the students if any of them were planning to register to vote or to vote, if they needed any help. And one student said, "Oh, I'm not going to vote. I don't have enough information." And I thought, this isn't a secret. Every candidate wants to get the information out there. The League of Women Voters wants to get the information out there. The Board of Elections wants to get the information out there. You can find out. And I think it's our duty, honestly, as citizens to do at least that.
And you're a student, you spend your whole day learning. So learn this.
Perhaps we should all be lobbying for making voting compulsory, as it is in some countries.
I think the step before that is that a lot of people are talking about is to make it a holiday, election day, a holiday,
Hmm.
which
Yeah.
is
That, I mean, that would work in a normal year, but this year, with the pandemic,
it's true.
Yeah, could get iffy.
yeah.
Well, thank you all for answering the questions and for answering the question of that viewer. And before we go, I again just thank you all for what you do, even just outside of the panel, working in government, working with the League of Women Voters, being a historian. I know we all appreciate what you do. And I'm going to do a plug of my own. The Women's Opportunity Center is a nonprofit foundation, and so we operate through donations and grants. And so if you go to womensopportunity.org, you can give us a donation there, get involved. We're still offering our virtual programs and services, even in the COVID-19 world. Everything is still business as usual. It's just all on Zoom, as we are all, on Zoom. And since this is a panel on voting, I thought we should close with important voting deadlines. So election day is Tuesday, November 3rd. The deadline to register by mail, in person, and online is October 9th. The deadline to request a ballot by mail is October 27th. And the early voting period runs from October 24th to November 1st. And before, coronavirus, New York was not, everyone could vote by mail. You traditionally need to go to the polls. But I saw recently that the state government passed a bill. So now anyone can vote by mail this year, and you can just cite COVID-19 as a reason for being nervous to go to the polls, and anyone this year can vote by mail. So if you want to vote by mail and you're nervous about going to the polls, then just, ask to get your ballot by mail. And so thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. We really appreciate. Have a great weekend, and please make sure to vote.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Aryn.